The crossing of the Red Sea is one of the highlights of the Exodus story, but the wonder of that moment did not last long. Immediately after the Jewish people had walked through the sea with resolute trust in God, the narrative crashes. The people left the shores of the Red Sea and went into the desert, and for 3 days they had no water. When they did find water at Marah, the Torah tells us, "V'lo yachlu lishtot mayim mimara ki marim hem." They could not drink the water from Marah because it was bitter. So they complained to Moshe. These are the people who had just marched off between the crashing waves of the Red Sea, staking their lives on their faith. Would these same holy people really expect God to allow them to die of thirst in the desert? The Nesiva Shalom explains that overcoming a spiritual challenge is not a linear process. If we succeed in attaining a spiritual goal, that is not the end of the story, because if we do not grow, we stagnate. For our spiritual growth to continue and for our existence to remain meaningful, we need bigger challenges. Thus it was with our ancestors in the desert. After the amazing act of faith at the Red Sea, the Jewish people had a new challenge. They walked off into the desert, expecting perhaps to arrive at the promised land, and instead they found nothing but heat, desolation, and fear. It made no sense at all. Instead of arriving in a land of milk and honey, they were dying in a desert. The divine plan seemed derailed, and nothing was happening to put it right. So they complained. What then of the solution? God showed Moshe a particular tree and told him to throw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. Why did God have to point out a particular tree? And how could a tree sweeten the water? Nesiva Shalom quotes the Zohar, who says that the tree in question was no less than the tree of life from the Garden of Eden, and that it was a hint to the Jewish people that they should observe Shabbos. This apparently baffling comment from the Zohar is an insight for us all, and when we understand it, it is perhaps more relevant for us now than for any time in our generation. On Shabbos we refrain from engaging with this world, because it is as if God lifts us back to the Garden of Eden, where all is well and life is entirely spiritual. When we are in that blessed state, God's love and care for us are dazzlingly obvious. Any desolation, fear and disappointment that we might encounter in this world are transformed into a gift of God. Perhaps incomprehensible, perhaps difficult, but we know that it is all part of a plan and that we just have to trust and play our part. The lengthening coronavirus crisis is a mirror of our ancestors' frustration and incomprehension in the desert. Like the journey through the Sinai, coronavirus seems pointless and miserable, and yet again we are tempted to think that the divine plan is derailed. But the sweetness of our Shabbos reminds us that, like every setback and disappointment, it is but a further challenge from God, an opportunity for us to love Him the more fiercely, the more obstinately, the more passionately. So the tree sweetening the waters is a metaphor for the heavenly perspective of Shabbos, which makes the trials of this life a bit more bearable, a bit less puzzling. That perspective is gifted to us every week with the return of Shabbos. And I hope that both those who can come to Shul and those who can't will use the message of Shabbos to confront our current challenges with a more serene eye. Finally, I thank all you good people for keeping Shabbos, and please pass on my thanks to everyone you know who does the same, be it 100%, 99% or 1% Shabbos observance. You bring the sweetness of Eden into our desolate world, and like our ancestors of old, you help us on our onward march to the promised land and redemption for the whole world.